Lecture 18 is called Nationalisms. Let's characterize this term. An identifiable national culture that is different from all others and perhaps better, at least that's implied. National culture should be linked to the state. Nationalism is a modern phenomenon. Many historians talk about the emergence of nationalism in Europe, at least, after the French Revolution. I've heard one historian describe nationalism as a reaction to the Enlightenment notion that all people are essentially the same. Of course, nationalism says quite the opposite. A person's loyalty should extend beyond the local, beyond the regional, to the state itself. A person's identity becomes wrapped up in the state. In other words, if you were in Tokyo tomorrow and somebody on the street asked you where you were from, you would probably say the United States as opposed to Georgia or Atlanta or Bartow County or what have you. So again, identification with the nation state. National anthems emerge to identify the state and point to its uniqueness and the everyday person's involvement symbolically and otherwise with the state. People fancy that they have something in common with many other people of the same nation, an imagined community of like-minded people. Resistance to nationalism? Well, Marxists will argue that society is comprised of distinct classes and that working men, say in England, have more in common with working men in Germany than they do with the aristocrats of their own countries. For Marx and Marxist followers, class trumped nationalism. Aristocrats, of course, believed that they had more in common with their fellow aristocrats from other nations than they did with the poor and the working class of their own nations. So, again, in reality, it appears that nationalism tends to trump class in opposition to the Marxist idea. Nationalism across portions of Eurasia emerges to fight European imperialism. The Young Turks and the Ottoman Empire, again, trying to push back against Western imperialism. Japanese nationalism. The Japanese are quite good at adopting Western technology while at the same time rejecting Western culture. Arab nationalism in the Middle East, we've seen this in our own times. The Indian National Congress and the ejection of British rule in India. So nationalism in these colonized or peripheral countries can become well organized and powerful enough to fight the imperial power encroaching upon them. Uses of nationalism. Nationalism provides loyalty to people facing change. Think of sort of a we're all in this together type of cliche, or a more recent cliche, let's make America great again. Governments use military service, mass education, especially heroic and nationalist history lessons, and patriotic literature to instill nationalist sentiments. There are those who believe that the purpose of history and historians is to tell these great tales of valor and heroism, to exalt the state. Most historians themselves would tell you this is nonsense, but people outside the profession, especially politicians, often believe that is our role. Drama, music, museums, marches, ritual celebrations, the 4th of July, which we just did a few days ago, carry this nationalist message to the unlettered. Nationalism provided alternatives to traditional loyalties, the state or the religion. Now in the West, we have for so long now had a separation of state and religion that that's usually not a problem. You see that it is quite a big problem, however, in other parts of the world, especially with Islam in the Middle East. Does Middle Eastern nationalism trump or succumb to Islam? That's a big question, and of course the answer is still in front of us down the road. Where populations are too diverse, nationalism generally weakened the state as with the Habsburg Empire in Europe and the Ottoman Empire, both in the 19th century, where great diversity resisted unity and diminished state power. Some traditions essential to particular societies that create and help to sustain nationalism. In Japan, for instance, reverence to the emperor and Shintoism essential? Well, not really. It's more of an invented ritual in more recent times. In the United States, Thanksgiving is invented in the 1860s, but it's sold to the American people as a tradition that stretches all the way back to the Pilgrims in the 17th century. Again, nationalism is an effective rallying point for various peoples as they resist European imperialism. Now, I'm going to give you a specific example here of how nationalism works. We're going to talk about American exceptionalism for a moment. It's an example of nationalism that is both familiar and hopefully useful to this particular student body. Let's characterize American exceptionalism. It argues that Americans are a unique people with a unique mission in the world. Americans are to spread their superior governing institutions, republicanism, across the world. And again, by republicanism, I'm not talking about the Republican Party. We're talking about the radical English ideology brought here in the 17th century that stresses a fear of concentrated power. Let's go on with American exceptionalism. Americans are to spread their superior market economy, capitalism, across the world. American freedom is both organic and portable. By organic, I mean American freedom expands and contracts. It does not stay the same. It's a dynamic, organic thing, almost a living thing. You see some people are afforded American freedoms and other people are not. People constantly sort of banging at the door wanting their piece of American freedom. The women's rights movement. 100 years ago, women could not vote. African American citizens, the laws changed in the mid-1960s, fundamentally changed their status in this country and afforded them full or first-class citizenship. I said American freedom is portable. That is, we can take it other places, or at least we try to. And we've had success in the 20th century. Think about Japan after World War II. Think about Germany after the Second World War. And then we've had disasters in Vietnam and in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan. Certain cultures reject these notions of American freedom, and other cultures are more congenial to it. American exceptionalism says that the American people were destined to dominate North America from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It argues that lesser peoples, whether they're Indians or Mexicans, or at least less productive people, may be moved aside as Americans fulfill their manifest destiny to dominate this continent. American freedom says, of course, that the United States does not lose wars. That obviously has been turned on its head. Americans don't fight wars for material gain, rather for the good of all. We see this repeatedly, especially in the 20th century, World War I and II. Americans place a historically unique emphasis on, and these are sort of the items that Alexis de Tocqueville talked about when he visited the United States in the 19th century. And he wrote a book called Democracy in America. And in this book, he makes the argument that we perceive ourselves as unique and indeed may be in our differences with Europeans. De Tocqueville says that Americans place a great deal of emphasis on personal autonomy, individual freedom, egalitarianism, a fancy word for equality, populism, the power of public opinion, and of course laissez-faire, the notion that the government has no business in the economic affairs of the American people. American exceptionalism is now used by politicians as a stick with which to beat their opponents, an insidious way to call into question your opponent's love of country. Remember that Samuel Johnson said that, quote, patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels. An effective use of nationalism by Abraham Lincoln. This is in his first inaugural address, and this This does a nice job. Let me put my glasses on here so I can read this to you. This, of course, is just as the Civil War is beginning. Lincoln says, quote, "I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell with the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." Very nice use of nationalist sentiment to try to create unity instead of division. I'm going to read another quote to you. This is Ernest Renan's famous essay, "What is a Nation?" Quote, "A nation is a soul, a spiritual principle. Two things, which in truth are but one, constitute this soul or spiritual principle. One lies in the past, one in the present. One is the possession in common of a rich legacy of memories. The other is present-day consent, the desire to live together, the will to perpetuate the value of the heritage that one has received in an undivided form. The nation, like the individual, is the culmination of a long past of endeavors, sacrifices, and devotion. An heroic past, great men, glory. This is the social capital upon which one bases a national idea. To have common glories in the past and to have a common will in the present, to have performed great deeds together, to wish to perform still more, these are the essential conditions of being a people. One loves in proportion to the sacrifices one has, to which one has consented, and in proportion to the ills that one has suffered. One loves the house that one has built and that one that has been handed down to us. The Spartan song, quote, "We are what you are, we will be what you are," is, in its simplicity, the abridged hymn of every nation. So let's draw some conclusions here. First, nationalism is merely another way of organizing and maintaining societies. Empires held sway for millennia. Religion was a great factor in unifying and organizing people for centuries. An imagined community, in the famous words of Benedict Anderson, is another way of organization, nationalism. The nation state is a particularly dangerous way to do so, as minorities or any group designated as the historical other may be eliminated as they're deemed not proper members of the nation. Thank you for your attention.